The shir today is Le'ilu Nishmas Chana Fegalea Bas Avraham, David's mother. And the Neshama should have an aliyah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Bayrei minei mezainis. The question of the day is, can a Jew own a McDonald's?
What?
McDonald's. Can a Jew own a non-kosher restaurant?
Oh, non-kosher one.
A non-kosher restaurant.
I guess if it was like a
silent partner,
no.
an investor.
First, hold on. First, can you own it?
I know it's not
I doubts about it.
there's loopholes there that you can get to, but it's not the right
I have doubts about it. I got doubts.
What about being a chef or a waiter in a non-Jewish restaurant?
I have even more doubts about that.
Even more doubts. What about being a sales representative for McDonald's?
wholesaler of treif meat.
Or for a wholesaler of treif meat? And what about owning stock? That's another question.
Stock in a treif company.
Can you own stock in a treif company?
Yeah, well, I mean,
Maybe less, maybe a little bit less probably.
depends if you're a major shareholder.
Okay, right.
If you're not the major shareholder, you're just one of the millions of people that own stock in,
Yes.
in some chicken company.
Okay, these are some of the issues we're going to discuss today, fascinatingly. But it begins with a different issue. Hilchos Maachalos Asuros Perek Shmini. The Laws of Forbidden Foods, Chapter 8. Primarily, we're going to be talking about the Gid Hanasha. The Gid Hanasha is the sciatic nerve that became forbidden to the Jewish people way back in Yaakov Avinu's times. When Yaakov Avinu was traveling to meet his brother, so the night before, the Torah tells us he got into a fight with a man. The man, according to the sages, was an angel, Esav's guardian angel. And they fought fiercely throughout the night. And in the end, he couldn't win. So what did he do? The Malach, it says the angel dislocated Yaakov's hip socket. And because of that, forevermore, the Jewish people, says the Torah, are forbidden to eat from animals the Gid Hanasha. That sciatic nerve that runs along the whole hind leg of the animal became forbidden to the Jewish people because of that.
Right.
So the Rambam today is going to discuss the parameters of that prohibition. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Gid Hanasha, Noyeg b'vehema v'chayo hatahoyru. The prohibition of the Gid Hanasha, eating the sciatic nerve, applies to kosher animals, domesticated animals, and beasts. Let's say, unlike yesterday's chapter, forbidden fats only apply to behema, not to chaya. Gid Hanasha applies to both. Va'afilu b'nivelus u'treifus shalahen, even dead non-kosher animals, mortally wounded non-kosher animals, which cannot be eaten, the Gid Hanasha prohibition also applies to them. V'noyhig b'shlil u'v'mukdashim. It also applies to an unborn fetus, and it also applies to animals that have been consecrated as a sacrifice. Bein kadashim hane'echalim, bein kadashim she'ein hane'echalim. Whether they're sacrifices that can be eaten or sacrifices that cannot be eaten. Every morning before Shacharis, we say the whole chapter from the Mishnah with all the different types of sacrifices. Some of them could be eaten. We see some of them the Kohanim would eat, some of them everyone could eat, some of them nobody could eat. Any type of sacrifice, it's forbidden to consume the Gid Hanasha, the sciatic nerve. It applies both to the right and left thighs of an animal. Even though in the Torah story, Yaakov, only one of Yaakov's hip sockets was dislocated, we forbid both in the animal. However, biblically, the only part of the sciatic nerve that's forbidden is the one that's on the round part of the hip socket. Shanemar, because it says, this is the actual verse, let me find my screen over here. This is the actual verse from the portion of Vayishlach. It says, Al kein lo yochlu v'nei Yisrael ad gid hanasheh. The Jewish people are not going to eat the sciatic nerve. By the way, the word nasha literally means removed, because it was moved from its place in Yaakov. Which nerve are they not going to eat? Asher al kaf hayarech, the one that's on the ball of the hip socket. So that's the only one that's forbidden biblically. Avol shar hagid shalamayla min hakaf v'shalamata ad soifoi. But the rest of the nerve, above the hip socket, below the hip socket, all the way down to the bottom, v'chein chelev shal hagid, and also the fat on the nerve, einei asur ela midivrei soifrim, are only forbidden rabbinically. And here I actually put a little graphic picture so you can see what it's talking about. they actually pulled out the nerve, so you can see the nerve. This is the fat by the nerve. That's permitted. Sorry, this is forbidden rabbinically. Ushne gidin hein, the Rambam says, if you look at the anatomy, there's two nerves here. Hapnimi hasamuch la'etzem asr min ha'Torah. The inner one, that's this one right over here, very close to the bone. That's forbidden biblically. Asr min ha'Torah. V'ha'elyon kulai asr midivreim. And the entire outer, see how it's outer but also upper. It goes higher up. This upper part of the Gid HaNasha is forbidden rabbinically. If somebody were to eat from the totally biblically forbidden part, that's the inner nerve, this one here, on the place that's on the hip socket, loika, you get lashes. Biblically forbidden, you get a biblical punishment. If you were to eat from the fats over here, or any other part of the inner nerve, the part that's not exactly on the socket, or any part of the outer nerve, the sages will give you lashes, rabbinic lashes, not biblical lashes. The kamashir achila kazayis, classically, how much do you have to eat to be liable? An olive-sized portion, that's how it always is. But if you ate the entirety of the nerve that's on the socket, even if it isn't an olive size, you get biblical lashes because it's considered like a full creature on its own. We had this law earlier in these laws. You eat a full creature, a full fly, a full bee, even if it isn't an olive-sized portion, because you've eaten a beria, because you've eaten a creature, you're liable. So here, according to the Torah, the Gid HaNasha, even though it's part of an animal, is considered to be a creature unto itself. And if you consume the whole thing, you get lashes just for consuming it, even if it doesn't have a kazayis. Ochel kazayis migid shel yamin, ukazayis migid shel smoil. What if you ate an olive-sized portion from the right sinew, on the right leg, and an olive-sized portion from the left leg? Oisha ochal shnei gidim kulan, afal pishein ben kazayis, or you ate both the right nerve and the left nerve in its totality, even if it doesn't have an olive size, but you ate the whole thing, so you're going to get lashes anyways. Like a shmainim, you get 80 lashes, which means you get two sets of lashes, one for each nerve. The commentaries say you have to have been worn separately for each one. If you're worn separately for each one, you get two sets of lashes. And the same, you would get lashes for every individual sciatic nerve. So if you took 3, 4, 5 cows, and you consumed all the sciatic nerves, and you were warned for each one separately, you get a separate set of lashes for each one. Ha'oif, says the Rambam, a bird, ein by mishum gid hanashe. It doesn't have the law of the gid hanashe. I tried to demonstrate here for me a chicken, but I see it may not be clear from this diagram. But if you look at a bird, the Rambam describes it, he says, mipnei she'ein le kaf yarech, ela yarechai aruch. Birds, anatomically speaking, they don't have a ball in their hip socket. Yes, it's just long and flat. Were you to find a bird that does have that kind of a socket with a round ball, like the thigh of an animal, then of course, its sciatic nerve will be forbidden. You won't get lashes for it. It's not biblically forbidden, but it will be forbidden. Also, if you find an animal that has a long and flat hip, not with a ball and socket, like a bird, gid hanasha shala asur ve'ein leiken alav. Since it's an animal, we're going to forbid the sciatic nerve. Since it doesn't look like an animal's socket, we're not going to give you lashes for it. Halacha hey, ha'oichel gid hanasha mi behema v'chaya hatmeim. A person who eats the sciatic nerve from a non-kosher animal or beast, potter, you're exempt from punishment. Lefi she'einei noyeg batmeya, ela bebehema shakula mutaras, because the law of the sciatic nerve doesn't apply to an animal which is already non-kosher inherently. It only applies to an animal which is totally permitted, and of that permitted animal, the sciatic nerve is forbidden. Nevertheless, here's a kind of fascinating parallel, or other side of the law, is that it's not forbidden like a kosher animal, but it's not forbidden like a non-kosher animal either. If you eat just the sciatic nerve from a non-kosher animal, you're not considered to have eaten from the rest of its body. Because sinews are not included in meat. The words of the Talmud, it says the gid hanasha is like wood. It has no flavor. If you eat from the fat on the sciatic nerve in a non-kosher animal, then you've consumed non-kosher meat. But if you only consume the sinew, the actual nerve, the gid hanasha of a non-kosher animal, you actually are exempt on both sides. You're exempt on, you didn't eat non-kosher meat, but you didn't eat the sciatic nerve because it's not from a kosher animal. Halacha vav, ha'oichel gid hanasha shel nevela, oishel treifa, oishel oila. If you eat the sciatic nerve of a kosher animal that has other circumstances, it's died, or it became mortally wounded, or it became consecrated. It's a ola, it's a burnt sacrifice. Chayav shtayim. Now you're going to be liable on 2 counts. First of all, on the count of the nerve. Second of all, on the count of forbidden meat. It's a dead animal. It's mortally wounded. It's a korban. On the principle of what's called Isur Kolel, the expanding scope of the prohibition, because it was included in the prohibition of its entire body, which used to be permitted and now became forbidden because it's a sacrifice or a nevela or a treifa. Nichlal gam hagid v'naisaf alav isur acher. The sciatic nerve is included and it also gets an additional prohibition. In other words, when the animal was alive and healthy, the whole thing was permitted. The sciatic nerve was forbidden. Now that it became dead or mortally wounded or a sacrifice, the whole animal is forbidden. Because the scope of the prohibition expands, it also applies to the individual unit of the sciatic nerve and makes it prohibited twice. Halacha Zayin. Hanoitel gid hanasha. If you wanted to remove the gid hanasha, as you see here, this is actually a process of nikur. We discussed this the other day where, because there's so many forbidden fats, if you want to eat meat properly, you have to go and pick out all these non-kosher fats. You also have to pick out the gid hanasha. If you take out the sciatic nerve, tzarich lechatet acharov. You have to, literally it means you have to dig after it. You have to really go deep into the animal's thigh and get out all the parts of the gid hanasha, because it does branch off into many, many thin branches. It begins at the socket in a thick way. It's called the trunk, right, you said? And then it goes into little twigs, branches, capillaries, a whole maisa. If you want to chase it down the leg, it's very complex. But you have to take every part out. Ad shelo yasher mimenu klum. Till you leave nothing from it. This is why today we don't eat from the hind part of the animal, because it's just super complicated, not worth the time. It's so detailed and so demanding to remove every single part. In the olden times, in the village, you shechted one cow for a whole city. You had to get every piece of meat that you could, so you would spend time taking it out. Today, we're industrialized, it's impossible to spend all that time. But if you wanted to, you would have to go after it all the way to every little part of it. A butcher, the local butcher, is trusted about the gid hanasha like he's trusted about forbidden fats. If he's selling you kosher meat, you can assume he took out everything that has to be taken out. However, you cannot just buy meat from any butcher. He's a kosher guy, he has a kosher reputation, then he's the guy who can slaughter, sell, and be believed. When are there limitations? Only in the diaspora. In Israel, in the time when it was all belonging to Torah observant Jews, you can buy from anybody because everybody was assumed to keep the Torah. Of course, today, as the commentaries point out, unfortunately, the prevalent Jewish community in Israel is not Torah observant necessarily, and so you can't just go buy from anybody. The same laws will apply. You have to have a guy who's kasher, muchzak b'kashrut, he's kosher reputation, and then you can buy meat from him. Halacha test tabach haneman limkar basar. You have a butcher who's believed, he's trusted to sell kosher meat. V'nimtza b'sar nevela, ay b'sar treifa, yetze mitachas yadai. Unlike yesterday's case, end of the chapter, where there was a butcher who had some fats found in his animal. Here you actually discovered non-kosher meat. There's literally dead animal meat or mortally wounded meat coming out of his business. Machzir es hadamim labailim. He must reimburse all the money to all the people who bought meat from him, even if they already ate the meat. He has to reimburse them. We put him into excommunication and we fire him. Unfortunately, there was a case here in LA a bunch of years ago with the situation. Just before Pesach, there was a meat store that was discovered to be selling non-kosher meat. The other year, it happened in New Jersey.
Was he? He'd have to reimburse all the people.
By law, you'd have to reimburse all the people.
They filed a lawsuit against him.
I don't remember all the details. It was crazy times, just before Pesach and everything. There's no way to fix it, ever, to buy meat from him again. Unless he goes, on his own volition, this butcher goes to a place where nobody knows him, and he returns a lost object, an important item, which he could have kept for himself and made money off it, or he slaughters his own animal. And if it's discovered to be treif, he actually discards it, even though it cost him a fortune. and he's doing this in a place where nobody knows him. If he's doing it where people know him, then you can just say he's just doing a trick to be reinstated. No, he's doing it where nobody knows him. That's a sign, Shavadai asa tshuva b'lei ha'arama. Then he for sure did tshuva, there's no trickery here. Only then can you keep on buying from him. Otherwise, his reputation is stained forever. Nobody should ever buy from him. So now we're kind of shifting gears because we're talking about butchers selling meat on trust. Now we're going to go into a whole bunch of cases related to selling kosher and non-kosher food. A person buys meat and he sends it in the hands of a regular common person. This common person is believed about the status of the meat that he's holding. Even though the guy, the courier, is not reputable necessarily to be fully kosher, we're not worried that he's going to switch the meat that he's holding. You gave him a package of meat, he'll deliver it for you. Even Jewish slaves, even Jewish maidservants are believed in this matter. But not an idol-worshipping Gentile. You give him a package of meat, he's not believed to deliver it fully. If he may exchange it. And therefore in chapter 13, in a couple of days, we're going to have a bunch of laws as to how you have to allow a non-Jew to handle your meat. It has to be double sealed, or other situations where we're allowed to send meat with a non-Jewish agent today with Uber Eats. And all these apps, if a pizza store is sending you some food, or a meat store is sending you some food, they have special rules of how they have to wrap it. Otherwise, there's a chashash, there's a worry that they're going to switch it. Halacha Yud Aleph. Consider the following case. Eser chanuyos. You have 10 stores, okay? Here you see there's a block of stores. Can you see all the kosher signs? Kosher, 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 kosher. A bunch of kosher stores. Teisha moicheres psar shchuta, the achas moicheres nevelis. 9 stores are selling slaughtered kosher meat. One of them is selling nevela, dead meat, non-kosher meat. And this guy, a guy over here on the street, if you can see him, is a bit small. He went shopping. Only a guy, because a woman would never forget. But a guy goes shopping. He buys meat from one of the stores. And now he doesn't know. He comes home. His wife says, honey, where'd you buy the meat? He says, I don't remember. It was on the block of the 10 stores. I don't know which one. Asur. Even though 9 out of 10 are kosher stores, the piece of meat he bought is forbidden. Shekol kavua kemechetza al mechetza dami. There's a famous Talmudic principle. When something is stationary and it's in doubt, its status is half-half, 50-50. Even though proportionally there's 9-1, a ratio of 9-1 kosher meat, but since every store is in its place, and the guy, when he bought the meat, went into the store where the meat was stationary and he bought the meat, we have to assume 50-50 that he bought non-kosher meat. Aval basar hanimtza mushlach bashul, but let's say in the same case, if it wasn't a guy, see the piece of meat now on the floor? Out of the 10 stores, there's a piece of meat sitting on the floor. So this piece of meat has already left its place. It's no longer stationary. And it's sitting in the market. Haleich achar haroiv. Haleich achar haroiv. Then you can go after the majority. The kol de parish meruba parish. Because you have another Talmudic principle which says, when something separates from its place, it's considered to have separated from the majority. The majority of stores in this block are kosher. 90% chance that it's kosher meat. Since the meat has moved from its place, you can, by picking it up, you can assume you picked up kosher meat. Now you have to see what is the majority. If most of the sellers were idol-worshipping Gentiles, it's forbidden. If the majority of sellers were Jewish, then it's permitted. If you find meat in the hands of a Gentile, and you don't know who was his wholesaler, who does he get the meat from? If all the meat sellers in the region were Jews, it's permitted. Zehu din Torah, that's the biblical law. However, the sages already said, you find meat on the floor, bein bashuk, bein in the market, in the hands of a non-Jew, all slaughterers, all sellers could be Jewish. You find meat on the floor, assume it's non-kosher. Not only that, the sages say. The sages said even further. You buy meat, you leave it in your house, and it was disappeared from your sight. Asur, it's forbidden. Elohim Kain, unless you had a special sign on it. Or you had a recognizable, there's a look that you have that you can tell that it's it. And you know for sure that it's this. Where it was tied and wrapped. Otherwise, you leave meat out in the open, and you leave, it's forbidden. This causes problems today with meat freezers and the whole thing. Everything has to be doubly wrapped, sealed in a special way where it's known that it leaves no room for doubt that the meat was possibly exchanged. This is part of the sage's decree against potential stumbling blocks with non-kosher meat. Halacha Yud Gimel, see how far this goes. Tola kli male chatichos basar. A guy hangs a bowl from the roof full of pieces of meat. V'nishbar hakli v'naflo chatichos la'aretz. The bowl breaks, all the meat falls to the ground. Ubao matzah chatichos ve'en lebahen siman v'leitvia sayin. The guy comes back to the room. There's a shattered vessel, a bunch of meat on the floor, and he has no sign. He has no way to recognize it. He's not sure. Probably is the meat that fell from the roof, high chance, but he's not sure. Hareza Asur, it's forbidden. Even though it's pretty clear where it came from. Sheyesh loymar, because it's possible to say, Oisei basar shahaya bakli, graratu chaya isharetz. The meat that was in the utensil may have been dragged away by a rodent or by an animal. V'zeh basar achiru, this is different meat. That's how far you have to suspect. There's no games. Halacha Yudalid, Ram now returns to Gid HaNashe. Gid HaNashe mutar bahana. Although it's forbidden to partake of the sciatic nerve, it's permitted to derive benefit from it. Which means, Lefichach mutar la'adam l'shleach le'vikechavim u'mazalais yerech shegid HaNashe b'seicha. You have a non-Jewish friend, you can send him a whole leg of an animal, including the sciatic nerve, as a gift. You could even give it as a gift to the non-Jew while a Jew is watching. And we're not worried that he's going to assume that you're giving a Gid HaNashe free piece of meat. He knows you're giving it to a non-Jew, probably non-kosher. We're not worried that maybe the Jew's going to eat from it before the sciatic nerve is taken out. In a full leg, you can see where the Gid HaNashe is. Therefore, if you cut the hind leg into pieces and you're giving it as a gift to a non-Jew, you cannot give it in front of a Jew in a Jew's presence till you remove personally the Gid HaNashe. Perhaps a Jew might eat from it. Halacha Tezvav, a general principle. Wherever the Torah says, lo yisoichal, lo yisoichlu, lo yoichlu, lo yoichal, or lo yoichel, some have the nikudot here. Any expression of not eating, you shall not eat in the singular, you shall not eat in the plural, they shall not eat in the plural, he shall not eat, or it shall not be eaten, even though the expression is eating, echad isar achila ve'echad isar hana b'mashma. Implied is both a prohibition of eating and a prohibition of deriving benefit. Ad sheyifrit lecha akasuv, unless the Torah specifies otherwise. Kederech sheparat lecha b'nevela. For example, the Torah specifies when it comes to dead meat. It says here clearly, Shenemar, it says, right here's the beginning, l'sech l'kol nevela, don't eat dead meat. What does it say in the red? Lager asher bisharecha titnena va'achala. You can give it to the resident alien, the ger toshav, the non-Jew who keeps 7 Noahide laws. You can give it to him and he'll eat it. O machor lenachri, or sell it to a goy. There's a clear dispensation that says you're allowed to derive benefit from it. Ukechelev, and like forbidden fats, which we learned about yesterday, Shenemar ba, it says clearly, ye'aseh l'chol malacha. It can be used for all work. You can't eat it, but do whatever you want with it. That's the exceptions to know when you can derive benefit from it. Or if it's otherwise stated in the oral tradition that it's permitted to have benefit from it. For example, insects, creepy crawly animals, blood, a limb from a living animal, the Gid HaNashe, and the sciatic nerve, all of these, based on oral tradition, are permitted to have benefit from, even though it's forbidden to eat them. But that's the only time you get a dispensation. Otherwise, by default, every prohibited object in the Torah is prohibited to have benefit from as well. Any food that's forbidden to have benefit from, if you only derive benefit but you didn't eat it, let's say you sold it or you gave it to idol worshiping Gentiles or to the dogs, you don't get lashes. The sages will give you lashes because it's their prohibition. And any money you made is permitted. Any object, though, which is forbidden to be eaten and permitted to have benefit, even though it's permitted to have benefit from, you cannot do business with such articles or put yourself into a profession that deals with these forbidden objects. Except for the fats, where it says you can use it for any work. Only fats, use it for any work. Anything else, even if it's permitted for benefit. Benefit just means you can do a one-time sale, you can do a one-time gift, but you can't create a business out of it. Lefichach, therefore, ein oisin schayra leibinveles v'leibitreifos v'leibishkatzim v'leibernamasim. We cannot do business, commercial work, with dead meat, mortally wounded meat, insects, and creepy crawly animals. And this leads to the discussion of a Jew today owning a non-kosher restaurant. You should know that the consensus is that it's forbidden to own a non-kosher restaurant if you're the owner. There's different reasons. Some say you might come to eat the food. Some say other people will think you're eating the food. Owning fully a restaurant is completely forbidden. Actually, when it comes to being a chef or a waiter in the restaurant, Moshe Feinstein is even more lenient. He says you can't own the restaurant, but you could work there. Because we're not worried you're going to come to eat the food, because a waiter who's caught eating on the job will typically be fired. Now, if it's the custom in that store that the waiter could eat on the job, then it's forbidden. But to be a chef or a waiter is actually more lenient. Oh, so now there's other questions. Can you be a sales representative for a non-kosher restaurant? The answer is yes, you can. Totally permitted. Can you own stock in a non-kosher restaurant company? There's a machlekes here between the Minchas Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss in London, and Rabbi Yosef. The Minchas Yitzchak was very strict. Actually opposite. Funny. Yeah, funny enough. The Minchas Yitzchak was more strict. He says as long as there's a possibility that you can attend a shareholder meeting or have some kind of a say in the company, even if you own less than 51%, you cannot have stock in the company. Rabbi Yosef says no, he rules leniently, that's okay. He says, anyways, nobody will listen to you. Makes no difference. Unless you're going to have a really important say in the company, then it's forbidden. There's an important caveat to be made, which the Rambam is going to make in a second, which is that the prohibition only applies to biblically forbidden foods. Rabbinically forbidden foods, it's actually permitted. It takes down. Many restaurants could not be involved in biblically forbidden stuff. If they're cooking milk and meat together, that's prohibited. But if it's chicken only, that's already rabbinic. There's different rooms for leniency. It's treif. I know, but I'm saying, but the commercial element of it is technically still fine. Yud Zayin, another exception to the rule. Hatzayot shenizdamnu lechaya oif v'dog tmein. A person is a hunter or a fisherman, and he lands in his net. This is a huge fisherman's net. He lands in his net some non-kosher fish, or he lands in his trap some non-kosher animals. Or he got kosher and non-kosher together. Muter lemachran, he can sell them. He cannot purposely hunt only non-kosher species. You're allowed to do business with milk that was milked by a non-Jew and not seen by a Jew, or with cheeses made by non-Jews, because those are only prohibited rabbinically. This is the guiding principle, says the Rambam. And here you have actually a picture of this is a kosher McDonald's in Israel. But if you had a non-kosher one, that would be the discussion. Kol she'isurim min haTorah, anything prohibited biblically, asur lases by schayra, you cannot do business with it. The kol she'isurim midivreim, if it's only rabbinically forbidden, muter lases by schayra, you could do business with it, bein bisveikai, bein bivadai, whether it's doubtful or certain prohibitions, only rabbinic prohibition, that's allowed. Which is why there's a lot more room to be lenient with these restaurants if they're only dealing with rabbinically forbidden foods. By the way, if you're dealing with non-kosher stuff that's not for food, it's totally permitted. You can own a non-kosher pet shop because you don't sell pets for food. You sell pets for entertainment. It's a different thing. But in general, it's important to consult a rabbi before dealing commercially with non-kosher things.